Hey everyone, my name is McCormick. We're going to get started with the presentation. Give me 1 second. It takes a second to load here. Okay, so again, my name is McCormick. I'm a graduate student at Morningside College, and my study was on outcomes from two co-teaching models, station teaching and one teach, one assist. And again, I'm an 8th grade special education teacher. So the problem, currently there are 65% of 8th graders with a disability that lack basic math skills. Along with this, just in Iowa alone, only 37% of 8th grade students are proficient in math. These statistics are pretty staggering and they indicate a level of need not only for 8th graders but in the area of math. This is very concerning, especially when trying to prepare them for high school and making sure that they can pass high school. It's very concerning in that a lot of students who end up dropping out from high school, most of the time it's based on their past experiences, their past academic performances. So if they've had a history of failing math or struggling with math as one of the content areas, they have a much higher risk of actually dropping out because they cannot fulfill the credits that they need in high school. Along with this, IDEA, Individuals with Disability Act, schools are required to provide the most intensive intervention for students with special needs. And lastly, Common Core is always pushing schools to have the most effective instructional practices. So why did I choose this topic? Why me? Well, as I mentioned, I'm a co-teacher. I co-teach language arts and pre-algebra. I'm always wanting to improve my practice. I want to use the models that are most beneficial, if any. I want to become more resourceful for my co-teachers. And my co-teacher who was involved in the study was genuinely interested in the results as well. So for a little background on the models that were in this study, first starting with one teach, one assist. The research out there shows that this is by far the most relied on approach. Teachers are most likely to rely on this, and a lot of that has to do with planning time. If they don't have as much planning time together, this is an easier approach to use. Some of it has to do with teachers who do not feel as confident in the content area. They would rather be supporting, floating in the room while the content teacher leads the instruction. And what this model is simply that. It's the teacher leading instruction in the front of the room while the other teacher is floating amongst the room. They might be reteaching students one-on-one. They might be handling behavioral issues that are occurring during instruction. And they're just clarifying or answering any questions students might have. Of the research that's out there, there's mostly qualitative studies that were done. So basically studies that have interviews or surveys from co-teachers, so a lot of opinions, which is helpful, but yet it's not actual numerical data from using co-taught models. So there's concerns and advantages to this model. The concerns are it's not using one of the teachers to their fullest potential. That one teacher is just kind of floating around the room, supporting as needed, whereas the other teacher is providing all the instruction. It also might have a challenge where students might view that one teacher as less authoritative because they're not in front of the room. However, the advantages are it can meet the needs of all kids. If the higher students who are listening to the teacher in the front, their needs are being met. The lower students who need a little bit more reteaching, their needs are being met by having that teacher in the back of the room. However, it's most effective if teachers take turns flipping roles. If it's always the same teachers in the same roles, it's not beneficial for the kids. So switching to station teaching, in this model, there's usually 3 stations involved, and students are typically grouped based on their instructional level. There might be a low to middle to high group, but it's not always necessarily that way. It could be based on, which students work the best together, behavioral concerns, which students learn the best way, or learn the same way, excuse me. Research shows that this is a more structured lesson plan because there's set activities happening at those stations. It's for a set time, and then they rotate to a new station. Whereas in one teach, one assist, they're kind of just receiving all that instruction at once. And research also shows that this just meets different learning styles. There's a little bit of hands-on, a little bit of collaboration, independent, so forth. So the advantages of this model, students from some surveys have shown that they viewed both teachers as valuable because they're both leading activities. And there's more learning opportunities available. The concerns are the noise levels can be higher, which can impact their learning because there's teachers talking at the same time at different stations. And the other concern is the teachers have to be paced at the exact same time. They have to complete their station at the same time if this model is going to be effective. So the gap in the research, what are some of the issues right now? The biggest gap, in my opinion, is that there's very little quantitative studies out there. There's not studies that show the outcomes from co-teaching, actual assessment outcomes. There's just interviews and surveys, a lot of opinions from co-teachers or experts on co-teaching. If there was more quantitative research, this could benefit schools. They could see, does a model work better than another model in a class? And lastly, the research that's out there on co-teaching, a lot of it's very outdated. It's more than 10 years old. As co-teaching is still something that's still somewhat modern in a lot of schools today, there definitely needs to be more research that's present. So the purpose of the study was just to, determine which model is going to make the most impact. It impacts the education world because there's not a lot of research on there from the outcomes. So if there was a study done that shows the outcomes from co-teaching in certain models, this could impact education. It can impact teachers. They could start to see which models are most beneficial in their class or their content area. Personally, it's effective helps me because my co-teacher and I can have a better idea if a certain model works best in our class or on that given chapter, so forth. So the question for this research study was, which co-teaching model will result in higher academic outcomes on classroom assessments, specifically focusing on one teach, one assist and station teaching. This study was an A-B study. There were two phases. One phase was using the one teach, one assist model, and the next phase was using station teaching. My hypothesis for this study was that station teaching, utilizing this model, would result in higher assessment outcomes for identified students compared to the one teach, one assist model. And the theory that was supporting my hypothesis was the multiple intelligence theory from Howard Gardner, in that this theory basically addresses different learning styles, kinesthetic learners, interpersonal learners, so forth, that at each station there's different styles being met, different needs are being met. In this study, there were a total of 8 students. All of these students have an IEP in the area of math. Age 13 to 14, there was an equal amount of boys and girls. 3 were Caucasian, 3 were biracial, 1 Black African American, and 1 Asian American. The materials involved in this study, the main curriculum, the curriculum used for this study was Big Ideas Math, and it had 2 chapter assessments that were used for each phase. Other instructional materials that were used, Smartboard. This was mainly for the one teach, one assist phase, where the teacher would provide direct instruction up front with the Smartboard. This would then project onto their screens. So therefore, they also needed desktop computers. This was used in both phases. The students would look at the instruction from their desktop computer. They were able to take notes. And also in the station teaching phase, there was one station that was computer independent work time, where students might have played different online activities that went with the skills they were learning. They also needed chapter packets. These were packets created by the teachers that contained skills from Big Ideas Math curriculum. And lastly, they needed graphing calculators. This slide here just shows the different assessments that were used. So this chapter assessment was from the first phase of the study, focusing on these types of skills. And then the next phase of the study was this chapter assessment right here, and these were different skills. So the first phase of the study was station teaching. It started that students were given a pre-test. So from the previous slide, they were given a pre-test prior to the instruction. And then from then on out, every class had 3 stations. Each station was 15 minutes each. One station was teacher-led, and the next station was also teacher-led, but each teacher was covering different skills. And then the third station was independent work time. So again, as I mentioned earlier, students were most likely working on online game-like activities that were going right with the skills they had just learned. The activities did vary day to day. At our stations, at least for the teacher-led ones. Sometimes they were hands-on activities. Sometimes they were direct instruction type activities where the students were taking notes in their packets. Sometimes it was a little bit of cutting and gluing, putting things into their packets as a resource. But after all of this instruction, a post-test was given to see what types of outcomes there were from station teaching. The next phase of the study was with the one teach, one assist model. Again, this started with a pre-test given to the students. It was a different test, a different chapter. And in this class, one teacher would lead the instruction for about 45 minutes, while the other teacher was floating around the room doing things as I mentioned earlier. And after this phase, after each day of instruction, a post-test was given at the end to see the outcomes from this model. So a paired samples t-test was used to analyze the data. Mean scores were taken from one chapter test, station teaching, and were compared to another chapter test, one teach, one assist. This graph here just is an image that kind of shows the outcomes from those tests. So in the light gray blue, we can see station teaching, and in the darker gray, we see one teach, one assist. Overall, the results indicated that students actually performed higher after being exposed to one teach, one assist. This table here also demonstrates or shows the means, the averages from these tests. So we can see from station teaching, the mean was 69%, whereas from one teach, one assist, the mean was 88%. There was almost a 20% difference between these two models. So in the end, my null hypothesis was rejected. Station teaching was not, did not result in higher assessment outcomes. So the implications from this study, it encourages co-teaching. Co-teaching is going to be effective for students with special needs no matter what type of model is used. It impacts students and teachers. It supports current legislation right now. IDEA supports co-teaching, and this model involved that. From this study, teachers could also look at it and be able to plan more effectively. They can see that the assessment data can help show them which model is going to be most beneficial, if any model. Some limitations to this study, though. There was only 8 students. Had there been more, it might have been more accurate. The ability levels were different among these students. Some students were new to co-teaching, while some students had been in co-teaching all throughout middle school. Some of the students had attendance issues. Some of the students had behavior and motivation issues. Those might have impacted the results as well. The time frame, this was not even a trimester long. Had it been perhaps a year long, we might have gotten a more accurate idea of which model could have been most effective. And lastly, probably the biggest limitation is that these were 2 different assessments. They were 2 different models. In the future, if the researcher was to do both models for the same test, like have an experimental group and a control group, that might be more effective. I wasn't able to do that as I only had one co-taught class with this teacher. There definitely needs to be more research out there on co-teaching. There needs to be less qualitative interview, survey style research, and more quantitative research, actual numerical data. And there needs to be more research at this grade level in this content area. So in general, the final thoughts are that one teach, one assist proved to be more effective of a co-teaching model. It led to higher assessment outcomes compared to station teaching. This study also helped me realize that co-teaching instruction is beneficial no matter what. It supports students who have special needs are impacted through co-teaching. However, it definitely has me walking away knowing that there needs to be more quantitative research out there on co-teaching. There needs to be more assessment outcomes. And there needs to be more research at this level in this content area. So with that, these are the resources that were used for this study. And thank you for your time.